A strength a day, be your best every day. Hi, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strength Optimizer. I aim to help you stay healthy, be happier, and deal with challenges with greater resilience. Have you ever lost someone dear to your heart? What do you do when you're grieving? And how do you grieve with resilience? Today, you will meet Dr. Lucy Horn from New Zealand. She shares how the loss of her 12-year-old daughter, Abby, forced her to turn her academic training and professional practice to foster resilience in very personal circumstances. Thank you for watching. Good day, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strength Optimizer. Thank you for watching Strength Optimizers, the Science Up Your Wellbeing series. Today we have Dr. Lucy Horn joining us from New Zealand. Lucy is a senior adjunct fellow at the University of Canterbury and a co-founder of the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience. She is a TED Talk speaker and the author of Resilience Grieving, Finding Strength and Embracing Life After the Loss That Changes Everything. Lucy is also a pioneer of fusing positive psychology and bereavement research. I'm so grateful that you can join us today, Lucy. How are you doing?
Kia ora, Adimus, and hello, everyone from New Zealand. I'm good, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, once again, thank you for taking the time to share your research and applications about resilient grieving with us. So, Lucy, I know your works in resilient grieving are both unique and personal. It comes from your training as a resilient researcher, combined with the experience of the devastating loss of your 12-year-old daughter, Abby, in a car accident. Before we talk about resilient grieving, let's talk about resilience and grief. I know that the word resilience seems to be a buzzword in both the mental health and well-being setting. So perhaps you can clarify for us what exactly is resilient and why it matters.
Such a good question. And indeed, Adamus, this is one of the reasons I got into this field is that back after the global financial crisis in 2008, I became really frustrated that it seemed to me everyone was talking about resilience and that the economy needed to be resilient and we all needed to be resilient. And I remember thinking, does anyone know what this word actually means? And so that was what first inspired me to find out more and to start really digging into the scientific research about resilience. So I think most people nowadays have a pretty good idea of what they think it means, you know, that it is about how we steer through and adapt to adversity. So you have to have that presence of something undesirable going on. And then for us, it is about the ways of thinking and acting and being that enable us to navigate tough times and to learn from them. And for me, that is, you know, that is part of this resilience process, that it's not, there isn't any kind of end outcome, you know, it's not like you kind of, okay, I'm resilient now. It is always a work in progress and it is about learning what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And also I want to make from the outset the point really clear that it is about our internal resources, you know, the ways of thinking and acting that we bring to the situation, but it's also about our external environments. You know, it's really hard to be resilient personally if you are being systematically discriminated against, if you live in poverty, you know. So we talk about nature, nurture, and culture playing a major role here.
So sounds like resilient, as you mentioned earlier, is both the combinations of internal ability to navigate through adversity in tough time, but yet also acknowledging that there are systemic influences that can make resilience a little bit more challenging for some people, a certain cultural group, certain social academic group as well.
Yes, and I think the field that you and I come from positive psychology, I think it is fair to say that sometimes it has neglected or diminished the role of the system in which we live, the environment in which we live. So for me, it's really important that we don't do that, that we don't make it a kind of a stick with which to beat yourself up on because it's all of your responsibility. There is lots you can do, but it is everybody's responsibility.
Yeah. I'm so relieved to hear how you put the definitions or the conceptualizations of resilience, that it's not actually an end goal that we strive to attain. Because sometimes, for me personally, whenever I hear the word resilience, it always sort of give me a goosebump, in the sense that, because if I want to be resilient, then it has to be in presence of adversities or trials and challenges. And I don't like that personally. I also acknowledge that in life is inevitable, that we go through, we experience one shapes or one forms another in terms of challenges, trials, and adversities. But again, as I said, that it's not something that we try to achieve, but it's allowing to process internally, but also to leverage with whatever, I guess, that the collective support that we can have and give to one another, to make it more, I guess, that sometimes compassionate for us to allow us to go through that messiness, I guess, of adversity.
Yeah. And why is it important? Because sadly, we all have to navigate tough times at some point in our lives, and adversity doesn't discriminate. And if we didn't know that before last year, I think we all do now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely the pandemic touches everyone globally in one shape or forms or a degree. Then I think that certainly we got to embrace and admit that, yes, it happens to all of us one way or another. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that, Lucy. And based on your research in grief and bereavement, I'm just wondering, what are some myths around grief and bereavement?
Yeah, so this is where I got to when our dear little girl was killed back in 2014. I was very familiar with the body of research of resilience psychology, but I didn't know much about bereavement. In fact, what I did know about bereavement was the classic thing that most people seem to know about bereavement, and that is they've heard of the 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
Have you heard of some of them? Do you know any of them?
Yes, it's from Kubler-Ross. Yeah. Not necessarily in orders. I think that there is like a state of shock or denial, and then anger and bargaining and acceptance.
Yeah. So this is what most people think of as the path of bereavement. This is what is going to happen to them. And for me, when I was told that about the 5 stages of grief by the grief, people who were sent to help us, and the sort of victim support people and various other professionals at the time, it's kind of enraged me because firstly, the 5 stages of grief was just too passive a roadmap for me. So I'm trained in resilience psychology, and I have seen all of the literature that shows that most people can get through potentially traumatic events without requiring intervention, whether that is medical intervention or clinical counseling. And we have it within us to get through tragic, tough times by using very ordinary processes. And what struck me was that the 5 stages model just tells you what's going to happen to you, what you're going to feel like. And firstly, I didn't feel any anger or denial. I was pretty bloody certain that my daughter was dead and there was nothing I could do about it. And I didn't feel any anger or animosity towards the driver who crashed into them and killed them. And so it kind of made me curious about bereavement research. And so I started doing a lot of research into bereavement, and that made me pretty furious, really, because there's some interesting myths perpetuated about bereavement. So firstly, I can now tell you that we don't go through 5 stages of grief. Most people do not follow the 5 stages of grief, and there is an abundance of scientific studies that show that to be true. Sadly, the 5 stages is still being taught to health professionals in our universities and in nursing all over the world. So it's time to retire that stage model, because mainly it's not helpful. And people end up going to see a counsellor because they say, I'm not grieving properly because I'm not doing the stages in order, or I'm not doing certain stages. So I've got a bugbear against the 5 stages because they're not actually scientifically proven. They're not helpful because they make people think that they're not grieving correctly. Early. But also for me, they're not helpful because they're just too passive. They're about, this is what you're going to feel like. When Abby died and I was faced with not being able to do anything about that loss, I was so desperately wanting to do all I could to help us through the loss. Yeah. So I wanted to be an active participant in my grief process. And all of my work now, Ademus, is about helping other people be active participants as they navigate tough times. And there is so much that we can do to help ourselves get through that period. It won't remove the pain, and I'm not about removing the pain. Negative emotions are important, and you cannot grieve without experiencing pain. Yeah. But there are lots of ways that psychology has taught us that enable us to adapt to the loss of a loved one in a more human functioning way.
Yeah. So grateful and so good to hear you to debunk the myth that the 5 stages, again, I guess that for anyone who had experience of grief and loss, you understand that definitely it's not sequential, it's not in order. Grief is always messy, it's unpredictable. Yeah. And I guess that this whole 5 stages grief model is very much prescriptive, which doesn't work, because again, if grief is messy, then how can you, I guess that, expect someone to go through that very neat kind of, okay, in 3 months' time, you're going to experience denial. In another 2 weeks' time, you're going to experience anger. So again, so great to hear you not only speaking from your personal experience, but also from the scientific research that is no longer valid or sometimes even helpful for people. And it's important to acknowledge, again, grief is messy, also give people the freedoms to express and experience grief. I understand the cultural context also play very important, how people express grief publicly and privately as well. So thank you once again for clarifying that for us.
Can I share with you one of the models that I think is more helpful for people, which is very much what you've just been saying, that it's messy. So, we all grieve differently. We all have to find our own ways. But I really love a model that is called the oscillation theory of grief, that we oscillate backwards and forwards with our grief. And sometimes we are able to approach our grief and really kind of face up to it. And then sometimes we need to withdraw and go and hide ourselves or distract ourselves, because it's so exhausting, grieving. And that this model gives you permission to not be going at it, completely all the time, to give yourself a break. And I love that idea of we approach our grief and then sometimes we withdraw. And I think it's more helpful to think of it like that.
Yep, absolutely. I guess once again, give us the freedom and the flexibility. Yes, today I really want to cut on bed and cry and cry and cry. But next day, I may want to go up to the local shopping market, get a few more groceries done, and come back again, have a cup of tea or coffee with my maid.
Yeah, and actually what you've just described is exactly what these theorists, Straub and Shute, how they have suggested that grief plays out, is that sometimes we need to attend to our the loss stressor, so the missing of the person, the emotional outpouring that gives us, and sometimes we need to respond to how we are going to live without them. We need to do the kind of the practical bit of what am I going to do with their things?
Yeah.
Who am I going to ask to help me go to my daughter's, parent teacher meeting? Now I haven't got my husband or my partner. So it is, they distinguish between these two kind of processes we have to go through: the emotional bit of dealing with the actual loss of the person that we have lost, and then also the hard work in trying to imagine and create and adapt to this new world that we are living in which they are not there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lucy, you also mentioned something that's very important when you talk about grieving. It's not just a very passive process, but your desire was and continue to be want to be an active participant, to give yourself and the people around you a sense of agency, a sense of hope that yes, this is the moment that I feel that I have no energy left whatsoever to do anything, but yet it doesn't mean that it will be in that state forever. By just being an active participant, I think that really is going to help people to have that sense of agency and control. Yes, I can actually do a little incremental things that make that little bit of difference.
Yeah, totally. I absolutely agree. And that is why I ended up writing the book, Resilient Grieving, because positive psychology and resilience psychology give us these amazing tools of ways of thinking and acting that we know help people through trauma. And what I wanted to do in my work was apply them uniquely to bereavement and say, do they also help when you are grieving? And parental bereavement in particular is known to be the worst of any type of bereavement. So, I'm willing to acknowledge that I have my doubts at the beginning about whether the training I'd had at the University of Pennsylvania, whether actually it would be any use to me. And it turns out that all that knowledge really did just come to my rescue in my darkest days.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue for my next questions. And obviously, you created this term called resilient grieving. Can you unpack for us a little bit more? What do you mean by that?
So by that, I do mean that it is about working out the ways that help you adapt to the loss. So it is about the combination of resilience psychology and grieving coming together. And I do want to emphasize that using the strategies and tools of resilience psychology will never remove your grief. That is not the goal that we're trying to achieve here. Really, always what I have wanted to do is bring the best of science of resilience research, bring the most useful and relevant findings from that field of scientific inquiry and bring them to this bereavement context and ask what's useful here. And so that has driven this segment of my work. That's what has driven me over the last nearly 6 years now.
So once again, it's utilizing the scientific research and applications into very real and raw life situations such as grieving. Okay. And I'm so glad that again you debunk another myth in the sense that yes, we can have positive psychological tools, or what we call positive psychology intervention activities, but the angle is not to mute or remove us from the angst and the pain of the loss by saying that, yes, I have all these tools together. How can I experiment with them? How can I explore? How can I actually personalize, contextualize into my unique circumstances, while at the same time reaching out for help to other people as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. We have talked quite a fair bit in terms of resilience. I'm just curious, how do you measure resilience?
So I do feel quite strongly about this, Ademus. You don't.
Okay, that's a straight answer from Lucy. Yes, you don't.
I mean, that's, that is not actually, that's the very short answer.
That's right, yeah.
And that's my kind of, stirring the pot answer. But in my opinion, there's much too much measurement. No, let's pause here. Measurement is really important for science. So if you are conducting a scientific research study, an empirical study, then yes, you do need to measure resilience. And there are various ways you can do that out there. But what makes me cross is when people are now making a lot of money and putting a lot of effort into measuring well-being and resilience in a way to help individuals understand how they are tracking. And sometimes this becomes a stick with which to beat people, that you're not performing well enough. And living with grief is not a competition and not a race. And in truth, in all the work that we do at the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience, we feel very strongly that the best way to evaluate well-being and resilience is through observation, knowing your friends and colleagues and family and work teams and neighbors. And if you feel that they are tracking downwards and that their functioning is declining, then you need to be close enough to them to notice that. You should not discover that by a self-response survey. We need to do better, I think, with our relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. Once again, I totally agree with the fact that measurements from a research point of view has a valid place. But when that begins to become, again, a prescription, this is how you should score, this is how much score that you need to get, then I guess that, it just create more stress and more confusions for people to say that if I am not reaching that specific benchmark, what does it say about me? And as you mentioned earlier, grief is not competition, it's very personal, individualized. And I remember that in my past life, also working in the grief and bereavement setting, one of the very common questions people ask me is that, when would I get over this? 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years? I said,
never.
Exactly. And I said, you will never get over it, because you lost someone that's so significant, dear to you. And he or she will always, always, always be in your head, in your heart, in your mind. And I guess that that's another perhaps myth that people tend to hold on to. Just because so and so has so-called moved on, and therefore I have to move on according to the same pace, same pattern as well.
Yeah, I so agree with you. And I think I've learned some amazing things in the last few years, which have really helped me, which come from bereavement research, not positive psychology. And one of those is that when you lose someone you love, you do not need to sever your attachment with them. You actually, the trick to grieving well, shall we say, is to work out a relationship, an ongoing relationship with those that you have loved, so that you are loving them still, but without them physically there. And of course, if you think humans are good at doing this, I can love my dad and my brother who live on the other side of the world in England. I don't see them every day, and I don't even speak to them that often. but of course they are still part of my life.
Mm.
And in the same way, Abby is still so much part of my life. She motivates my work. My relationships with her brothers are so heavily influenced by her loss and her being on this planet. And I think so it's called continuing bonds theory. And I would really strongly suggest to your viewers and listeners that it's a very important part of grieving, is to work out what is the legacy of this person? Mm-hmm. What did they teach you? How did they change you? And then how can you bring rituals and ways into your life to keep them present? And, you know, I'm sitting here with my little necklace with an A on it here and an L on the other side. And I have little ways of keeping her with me. And our middle boy had a tattoo with her name put on his neck last year, and he was just 19, and it was beautiful, and he had little foliage around the edge of it because it reminded him of Sally, my dear friend who died with them. And I thought it was interesting for me to see that he was, by doing so, was ready to talk to, you know, friends about his sister, go, you know, sort of so publicly. And so I think there are just beautiful ways to memorialize those people. And I really want to urge your viewers to understand that is normal. You know, science recognizes that as a good thing to do now. And you're not mad if you do that. If you talk to them or you bring them into your life in some way, that's okay. Yeah.
Again, it is the theory of continuation bond. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think from memory, it's from Robert Niemeyer.
Yeah, amazing work. And his work, we've just interviewed him we've just done a new course called Coping with Loss, which is a guide to resilient grieving for health professionals. And we interviewed lots of the leading bereavement researchers in the field for this course. And his work on meaning reconstruction, which is, he says, this is the big thing you have to do in grief, is to kind of work out some way of integrating this loss into your life story to make sense from something so terrible that has happened. And I think it is really important contribution to the field, and we have loved working with Bob Niemeyer.
Yeah, excellent. I think we may just make an observation again, you know, coming from Malaysian Chinese kind of cultural heritage. When you talk about grief and loss, I think, again, in general, within the Chinese or the Eastern philosophies and cultural beliefs, it's very much encouraged that we maintain this continuation bonds with the loved one, not necessarily make them as some sort of spiritual authority or deity, but it's actually a form of respect that just because someone has died doesn't mean that he or she needs to be forgotten. So therefore, there's a lot of memorials, a lot of rituals to integrate their loss into the day-to-day lives, as compared, I guess, that the Western psychology, if you're not coping, then it's very easy to be labeled as your pathology. You something's wrong with you, and you need to move on. The world is moving so fast, you need to catch up. So once again, hearing what you say and the works of Robert Niemeyer, just to affirm the importance and the beauty of having this continuing bond with our loved ones who's no longer here on earth with us.
Yeah, I think it is really important. And we also, that resonates with me because coming from New Zealand, we are a bicultural nation. You know, we're founded on Maori ways of doing things. And so, of course, you know, where you come from, your ancestors, plays such a massive part in that culture. Sorry, I've got a sneezing dog underneath.
Jack is with us, okay? Just losing.
Jack would just like to say hello very quickly.
Hi, Jack.
Now you're going back to sleep. Go on.
Beautiful.
Working from home, hey?
Right. The story of our life nowadays. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So you're saying that New Zealand is a by culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a
Correct.
bicultural nation.
Nation.
We are, yeah, we are founded, we have a treaty. Yeah, we're founded to be absolutely to be respectful and in partnership with our indigenous Maori people who were here first.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm also just curious that from experience or from your research, what are some common attributes or characteristics for people who are resilient?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the most important thing here is to say that, resilience is an amalgam, a whole bunch, a combination of characteristics. And so you don't have to have every single, what makes you resilient might be different to what makes me resilient.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to conceptualize resilience like that. And we do know from the literature that there are some common characteristics, such as they will have strong supportive connections.
Yeah.
So, and those connections can be to people in their family or in their community, or of course your work colleagues can make a difference when you're going through tough times. But they're also connections to something bigger than ourselves. Yeah. So the literature often suggests that resilient people are people who have a sense of faith or have some kind of mission, that they really are serving something bigger than themselves. So connections are really important. Realistic optimism is really important. You mentioned, Ademus, earlier on hope, and hope is really important. And certainly from the feedback I get from my book, that is, I get a lot of amazing emails and messages on Facebook Messenger. And one of the things people most often write to me about is that my book gave them hope, belief that they could get through this. And so I'm thrilled about that, because we know that hope is such an important dimension of resilience. So but they also are really good at focusing their attention on the things that they can change, and somehow accepting the things that they can't change. So they have this kind of mental agility of being able to tune into the areas and the parts of their life that they can have some influence on, and somehow just sort of suck it up and get on with the fact that there's so much of life that we can't control. Yeah.
Thank you so much. With the different characteristic attributes, I guess that the next important question is that how do we actually teach and build resilience?
Yeah, and isn't it interesting that for us, we've spent the last 10 years teaching people resilience, teaching them the ways of thinking and acting that they can to build their own resilience. And sometimes 10 years ago, that was a hard thing to do, because people really kind of questioned the need for it. But in the last year, wow, I have so noticed the appetite for, amongst everyday folk, for really appreciating the fact that maybe the ways of thinking and acting that they have kind of mapped out for themselves or have become common and typical ways of thinking and acting sometimes don't serve them so well. And so the first thing is you've got to be ready for change, and you've got to be wanting to learn, and you've got to be curious, sufficiently curious that you are willing to build up a picture of self-awareness of what works and what doesn't work for you. And so it can be, the most simple things that we hear from people. Very often, one of the main things people say to us is that they might have watched my TED Talk, or they might have done some of our training, and they say that this strategy we use of asking yourself, is what I'm doing helping or harming me in my quest to get through that, whatever this is going on at the moment? People often, someone stopped me in the street the other day and said, your helping or harming thing has changed my life. So, clearly it is possible with quite a simple strategy to help people investigate what is helping and what is harming them. And I think if you put this into very everyday language, like as the world went into lockdown last year in March 2020, we were doing a lot of webinars. In fact, I spent my whole life on Zoom doing webinars. But when we would say to people, just ponder for the moment whether those media news notifications that are pinging on your phone all day long, are they raising your anxiety levels or lowering your anxiety levels? Are they helping or harming you in your quest to get through this really uncertain period of your life? And it amazed me how few people, or how many people, said to us, it never occurred to me I had a choice over that. And that I could just turn them off and my life would be so much, better, immediately better. So what we do is really try and relate this science to very everyday things. So I took myself off Instagram at some point last year because I just realized that it just was not helping my mental health in any ways. It was a drain for me. And so that was something that I needed to do. We just get people to understand their strengths. And when you know your strengths and you know your thinking traps, we do a lot of training around thinking traps, which are our common habits of mind that typically don't serve us so well, like catastrophizing. So when we do training in strengths and thinking traps, the aim is to help people build up a better picture of the ways of thinking and acting that help them and the ways that don't work so well for them, so that they're just better equipped to help themselves.
So it sounds like the fundamental step is need to have that sufficient curiosity to want to explore the awareness of how am I actually tracking, having this really raw and honest assessment in terms of what has been working, what has not been working, whether whatever I'm thinking, feeling, behaving, is it getting into the way of harming my quest, or is it catalyzing or facilitating my quest? And I think that takes a lot of intentional effort to really come to that place, because I guess most of us just do life and then get ourselves occupied, busy, move on again. With all these things.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, absolutely. At the core of resilience is a willingness to be self-aware and to keep learning and rethinking and questioning how that is working for you, but also honesty and bravery. Sometimes I will think to myself, I don't really truly know whether this thing I'm doing is helping or harming me. I might have to bravely ask my husband or Denise, my Dr. Denise Quinlan, who is my co-director at the Institute. Sometimes it requires me to bravely ask somebody else how they think I'm doing and whether I need help. And so I think that's important for your viewers too, to know that we don't do this thing called resilience on our own. We can do it with support and kind feedback from others.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more in that regards when it comes to resilience, when it comes to grieving. Again, perhaps it's the society expectations that we have been conditioned to some extent that this is a very private journey, a very private quest. But just hearing you giving us the ability and the permission to say, hey, it's okay. In fact, it's important, it's critical to ask for help, to reach out for help, especially those who know us, around us. Then again, it just opened up this very private bubbles to allow other people to come in to support us. Again, that also has a lot of cultural implications too, for a lot of collectivist culture or Eastern culture. Grief is a public affair. Everyone's getting involved.
Yeah.
And I guess that is, for me, again, based on my cultural heritage, is always a beautiful thing, even though sometimes can be a little bit overbearing if there's so many people coming in trying to interfere.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you.
That's right. Okay. Lucy, I know that a lot of people are familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, but some may not have heard the word post-traumatic growth, or PTG. I'm just wondering, what is post-traumatic growth and how does it relate to resilience and well-being?
So post-traumatic growth is actually more common than post-traumatic stress disorder. And it really, this is the work of Tedeschi and Calhoun, and what it suggests is that while, firstly, let's not minimize trauma in any way. It is not fun, it is terrible, it is haunting and tough to live through. But what the research shows is that more people grow from trauma than we ever anticipated. And so post-traumatic growth is the term that we use to speak to that, to define when people have grown from a traumatic experience. And there are different dimensions of that growth, and it sometimes can be in terms of relationships, so that they are after the event and the process that they go through in the aftermath of the event, they would have to acknowledge that some relationships have grown, that they have maybe perhaps a way of speaking to people in much more truthfully and authentically than they ever dared to have done in the past, because they went through this trauma and what they've learned in the aftermath. Another dimension is that you very often hear people say that the trauma has given them a completely different appreciation of life. So it alters they have this sort of sense of gratitude and the enormous privilege it is to live an ordinary life once you've been through that trauma. And for some people, it might take on a spiritual sort of format, that they have, a different relationship with their religion, or for other people that they might take on a mission that they hadn't done before. And so I guess for me, this particular aspect of my work around resilient grieving is my form of post-traumatic growth. It is work I never would have done had Abby not been killed. It is work I would never have done had Abby not been born and not been in my life. And so it is my way of making something good come from the bad, but also making her short life count for something, in that, she's still helping people. Between us, she and I are helping people cope with grief now. 3 million people have watched my TED Talk, which is just astonishing. And those are 3 million people who have learnt ways of thinking and acting that can help them through their darkest days. And I hope been given a prescription of hope that they can live and grieve at the same time. Too much of bereavement research used to only be conducted on the people who had complicated grief, which is the pathological diagnosis, but only 10% of people actually get what we call complicated grief. So 90% of the people are getting through it, and I'm just delighted that Abby and I can help those people out with a few more tools to help them navigate that process.
Absolutely. And with all, due respect, that this is the legacy that Abby has.
Yeah.
For everyone and for generations to come, and people continue to engage in this very honest, raw, and inevitable quest when it comes to grief. So thank you so much, Lucy. Just one last question for you. Got nothing to do with resilient grieving. I'm just wondering, what is one thing that you have been doing this week to look after your well-being?
I wasn't going to say this, but I can. I can show. I think he might have run away again now, Jackie. Anyway, I've actually got 2 little dogs down at my feet.
All right.
And, they just, whether I like it or not, I have to walk them twice a day, and we're lucky enough to live on a beach. So
all right.
They are my my well-being intervention daily, morning and night.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, that's all the time that we have today, Lucy. Once again, really appreciate you to share your expertise and your experience with us. It has been really an authentic, honest, raw, non-nonsense. I like it. Thank you so much. Okay. And if you want to engage Lucy's speaking, consulting, and training expertise in resilience and grieving, make sure you visit the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience website. And I'm sure that you can also reach her via LinkedIn as well. Would it be correct, Lucy?
Yeah, that's right. Please do. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you for watching. I'm Ademus from Strength Optimizers. We are here to bring out the best in you by optimizing your strengths. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Goodbye.
Kia ora. Bye-bye.